Good evening, my name is Cevario, and today I will introduce you guys the gadfly Socrates, one of the greatest philosophers of all time. And I will present about him. There is some content that I will talk about, but firstly, we're gonna go to the next page and ask ourselves, who was Socrates? Before we start, we should know that writing about other people's life is quite a bit challenging. In fact, we got a quiet lack of biographical information, and this is known as the Socratic problem, which is known as in the Romanian Greece back then in the before Christ. So known as one of the most influential thinker and philosopher of all time. But sadly, yes, as we heard before, how he really know, he never wrote down a single word. So we never really know what actually he got in his brain. So in reality, all we know about him was from what the other told us and pictured us. And the people that told us is written down in a dialogue with Plato, or his student Plato, one of the greatest philosophers of all time too. He described as short, fat, ugly, dirty, jobless, can't support his wife or his kids, antisocial, and doesn't care about his social status. It is really bad for a philosopher history. But as Plato said, it is an outward casting as he wears similarities, sculptures, silliness. If you open his inside, you cannot imagine how full he is. A good cup of companion, of sobriety, I tell you. The beauty of a man may have nothing to him, and that is who was Socrates. We are moving into the next page. We are gonna talk about the content of this presentation. Of course, it's about the Socrates philosophy and his legacy as asked. Into the next page. The first content is the Socrates philosophy. As one of the greatest philosopher of all time, one of the greatest thinker of all time, one of the most influential philosopher of all time, we should know what is his philosophy, what did he teach, what he did impact to us. So philosophia, or the word of the love of wisdom, early in the Socrates defense speech, he explained that his friend Chaerephon, if I don't mistaken, went to the oracle of Delphi and asked whether there were anyone that wiser than Socrates, and the oracle told the Chaerephon that no one is wiser than Socrates. In fact, that we are going to learn about how wise is him. Despite of his looks in outside, we're going to learn what's inside him that is quite more valuable, I think. We are moving into the next page, which he quote, "The true only wisdom is in knowing that you know nothing." Yes, according to Plato dialogue, the Socrates seemingly a superhuman individual who cares about asking questions about moral knowledge. And that's an absolutely why he known as a man of question. How he questioned everything to everyone. And the meaning of this quote, people think if somebody asks a question, made a question like I do, they're unwise, but I think it's just the opposite. The true wisdom is the knowledge of how little actually you know. It is a realization that allows you to start talking question to get the real truth. So without question, we don't have the truth. Without truth, we're getting none. We are moving into the next slide, which explains the Socratic method. The one that I told about, the method of questioning to arrive at the truth, the quote before this slide. The true only wisdom is in knowing that you know nothing. And when you know nothing, of course, you should ask something. Little story for this page. At the time, Socrates showed a little bit interest of the philosophy. The idea was bring the throne around were largely theoretical, bearing little practical application. But he soon realized that the thing that he learning didn't have any benefit to society. He was far more interested in addressing problems of daily life rather than questioning the world rather than questioning how the world is work, rather than questioning how the world is really actually walk. He believed that he was questioning ourselves in order to understand how we work. So that is the Socratic method, which is actually used until now. But we are going to talk about that later because we are moving into the next page. And why should be the Socratic method? In this, there's a little story behind this. So when the Socrates come back from the war, come back to the Athens, he did a quite bit thinking. You see, in his time, there's so many men who was considered to be wise are actually not wise at all or stupid. Also, he found that many people will tend to follow him blindly with, of course, a terrible consequences. If you never question this wisdom, you can never discover. It flows the knowledge, stands still like a stone and never growing, like changing like a tree. Like as I read in the number 1, number 2, and number 3. Number 1, believe. We start to believe in the stupid people, unwise people, who talk a lot, who consider himself to be wise, but actually not wise at all. And number 2, we start to follow him. And when we follow him, everything he said, we start to believe, like the number 1. And then we're moving up to number 3. We are stop growing. We are stay still like a stone, never growing, never changing like a tree. And yeah, just stoned. And that is why we're going to use the question method, or it sounds knowing as Socratic method. Now we are moving to legacy in the next page, the Socrates legacy. Let me re-mention that he is the most influential thinker of all time, one of the most famous philosophers of all time, the father of philosophy in the Western, and being mentioned as the first philosopher in the world, one of the most wisest philosophers of all time, one of the most influential men in the history. Despite of his outside look that being told is really bad, we're gonna look at his legacy in the next page. And yes, the greatest legacy is Socratic method again. I mean, there's a lot of his legacy that is going very, very well. Like, here is one. He passed his knowledge to his student Plato, which passed it to Aristotle, and Aristotle gave it to Alexander the Great. And this Alexander the Great spread the Greek thoughts to vast kingdom. And when the Romans took over the Alexander's empire, they expanded even larger and spread it to the Greek tradition even further. But that is not the most greatest legacy of all time from him. The greatest one is the Socratic method, a technique that is used to search for truth. But why is Socratic method is his greatest legacy? Why not other? You've heard about A, you heard about B, you heard about C. The Socratic method is long-lasting method, which is it used in the Greek age, ancient age, back then until now. Nowadays, they still use the Socratic method in the laws, even in the college, in the school. We ask something. This is a little story on how Socrates asked someone who are considered to be wise. This wise person told Socrates that if you love Zeus, the god of thunder, you will get your choose. But the Socrates start to ask, if that's so, then what is love? What is virtues? Is there any god to love other than Zeus? If we love the other god, did we also get the virtues? And if we don't love the god, will we still get the virtues? And of course, the wise person start to think and didn't get the answer. And that's why the Socratic method is still working from back then until now. Even some lawyers in laws still use them. And that's all from my presentation. We are moving into the next. Last but not least, thank you for your attention.